Good morning. Thank you for joining us all online this morning. My name is Dan Tinen. I'm an occasional lay reader at Bernardston and First Parish Northfield. And our service today is hosted by the Bernardston Unitarian Society, who gave us a nice new picture of the flowers in the front yard and the painted shutters and stuff. The topic of this service this morning is a humanist view of Easter and Passover. And whether you consider yourself Christian, Jewish, or atheist, agnostic, or something else, I'm assuming that you are all a little familiar with the stories that these holidays are based on. The Exodus from Egypt led by Moses, the Last Supper based on Passover, Jesus' betrayal by Judas, the trial before Pontius Pilate, his crucifixion, and on Sunday morning, the women finding the empty tomb. These stories are woven into Western culture and are the heart of the largest religious belief system in the world. Now, if you're religious phobic, if you've been wounded by fundamentalist upbringing, or you just object to being asked to believe something without evidence, don't panic. My mission this morning isn't to convert you to anything. It's not to evangelize for either Judeo-Christianity or for skepticism. We draw upon wisdom from all the world's religions, the words and deeds of prophetic men and women in both ancient and modern times. But whether we acknowledge it often or not, we're under the influence of both our historic Judeo-Christian roots and our humanist tradition that counsels us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. And I'm going to attempt this morning to show how these two sources of our faith can be reconciled and maybe even reinforce each other. I think it's worth mentioning that our society treats Easter very differently from Christmas. Maybe we're more comfortable contemplating the birth of a child than the death of a man, even if that man gets resurrected in the story. You know, Christmas is this big economic engine that involves buying a tree and putting lights on your house and traveling across the country to see relatives, although, our Jewish friends do travel for Passover, I think, more than anything else. The radio starts playing Christmas songs just after Thanksgiving. There's Black Friday and Cyber Monday and the Advent calendar counting down the days. By comparison, what does Easter get? Chocolate bunnies wrapped in gold foil, colored eggs in a basket, maybe a ham or lamb for dinner. And theologically, it should be the other way around. But Christmas happens at the darkest time of the year here in the Northern Hemisphere. And we need motivation to get us out of the house, something to look forward to. By comparison, in spring, we're already out. We're enjoying the first flower buds, the birds migrating back, the relief from the task of staying warm. So while Easter and Passover have faded as holidays in our secular society, they do have important messages about justice and freedom that are important. Now, these holidays are also influenced by ancient pagan festivals of spring, of fertility. That's where the bunnies and eggs come from. Yep. And I asked Jim Scott to sing us a song that he doesn't perform very often in concert. And this song celebrates the changes of the season, and he wrote it as part of a musical called The Tree and Me in 1990. And it's called Winter to Spring, and I'm going to try to share the lyrics with you. You're still muted, Jim. You got to hit that little thing there.
There
we go.
I'm sorry, I had to leave barking dog there. And yes, it's the longer days, more sun, and garden as orchestra. The breeze excites the branches with the sound of violins and rustles of percussion as the orchestra begins. The sun ascends its platform like conductor with baton, awakening the players, for the music must go on. Winter to spring, summer to fall. You can sing this part. And may each of us experience a lifetime of it all. Summer to fall and winter to spring. We are here to share the joy and sorrow all the seasons bring. All the seasons bring. The birds comprise the woodwinds, the great animals the brass, and higher partials flit between the flowers and the grass. In silent grace the water folk surrender to their dance within their fluid theater, so as not to break the trance. Winter to spring, summer to fall, and may each of us experience a lifetime of it all. Summer to fall and winter to spring. We are here to share the joy and sorrow all the seasons bring. All the seasons bring. From mud and water have we come to split the earth and sky, the plants and fish, the birds and bees, and lately you and I, to learn the dance of harmony and lessons all to share, of love and living circles rich with magic in the air. Winter to spring, summer to fall, and may each of us experience a lifetime of it all. Summer to fall, summer to fall, and winter to spring. We are here to share the joy and sorrow all the seasons bring. All the seasons bring.
Isn't that nice? Actually, it's too bad that we should mount a big production of The Entire Tree and Me one of these days. We'll see.
Yeah, we need lots of kids to do.
Lots of kids.
And dogs, too.
And dogs, yes. Our chalice lighting this morning is from the hymnal, number 453, and it's from the Passover Haggadah. Let me share this. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. And our declaration of fellowship in the Bernardston Church says, we unite to affirm that love is the spirit of this church and service its mission. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to give service to humanity. And now's a time that we set aside in the service to share our joys and concerns with each other briefly, respecting the time that we have here. If you come to this online meeting this morning with a joy so great that it will lift all of our hearts, please do share that. By the same time, if you would like the help of our community to help you carry some burden or concern that has arisen in your life, now is a time that we will open the floor for you to do that. And we'll look. Well, and we'll light one more candle to symbolize all those joys and concerns that we carry unspoken through the week. Well, my meditation or prayer reading for this morning is by Reverend Forrest Church. He was the minister of All Souls in New York City for 30 years or so. And in 2006, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And in an interview, he said this about his situation. I have long believed that religion itself is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. We are the religious animal. We asked, where did we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? What is life's meaning? What's life's purpose? Now, we don't always come out with religious answers, but these are religious questions that we ask. At some point, death requires our search for meaning. Without death, we wouldn't have to search for meaning. We wouldn't have to search for purpose. My own sense of the purpose of life is to live in such a way that our lives will prove to be worth dying for. And that puts an enormous moral, ethical impetus behind our work in this world. I take it one world at a time. I'm agnostic about the afterlife. I haven't gone there. It could not be, though, any stranger than this. There's no afterlife that could be stranger than life itself. And we need, first and foremost, even as we're dying, to celebrate the miracle of this day. So, let us contemplate the miracle of this day, of spring, of recovery, of new possibilities for our lives and the lives of others. Let's have a few moments of silence. Amen. Well, now is the time in our service when we take an offering to support these churches and their programs. You're invited to donate to your congregation, whether it's All Souls in Greenfield, the Bernardston Church, or First Parish in Northfield. And in the chat, I'll ask most of you probably have these methods of giving to support the institutions that support us, but I'll invite people to put in the chat addresses for anybody who might be looking for that. I'd like to add that there are several other interesting charities that are active in our communities, which are deserving of support. I'd like to put together a list of these groups. There are several groups feeding the people and supporting, finding affordable housing for the homeless, and many other worthwhile tasks. So we encourage you to donate to them as well. And now it's the time for announcements, those more mundane things. Annette, you got anything?
Mute, Annette.
She's getting instructions. There you go.
Announcements. Let's see. Barry, do you want to say anything about next week?
Yes, my sermon next week is going to be centered around the idea of the labyrinth. This is an old thing that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, but in the medieval area and earlier, it was picked up by the church just to be a symbol that the journey through the labyrinth is a spiritual journey, an inward and outward. And so my wife and I have both been working on labyrinth projects. And so I'm going to put some thoughts about that in, and the idea of the spiritual journey, the idea of the inward journey that leads to an outward journey, and the idea that the person you were when you went in, you're someone different when you come out, and how that's been picked up culturally and artistically throughout all of our history, but particularly how the churches with the labyrinth. And I live in Montague, and I will tell you there is a labyrinth here. The Congregationalist Church made one about 15 years ago, and I walk it every single morning as part of my morning walk. And so I'm going to just kind of pick that up and go somewhere with it next week.
That's cool. I was.
Okay.
There's a labyrinth that's at St. James in Greenfield as well, and someone made a private labyrinth on the road between Greenfield and Leiden.
That's the same person at the St. James Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
very cool.
I'm going to call and invite her to come to Barry's service. And she's
a couple of
Eliza Shackler, I think.
No.
A couple more announcements for Bernardston Church. We will start our arts group for those folks who are fully vaccinated on Monday, April 26th. It'll be 9 to noon. And so any level, just bring your supplies, and you can call me about it. My number's on the webpage. The last Sunday, we will be hosting a 3-church service with Reverend Steve Wilson, who will be broadcasting from California. And he's going to talk about the Unitarian hero Star King.
Ooh.
And Reverend Star King. And it's quite a story. So that will be fun. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring back a play that Reverend Wilson created about the trials and tribulations of being an activist. And it seems like an appropriate time because we're all kind of overwhelmed with which place do we put our energies. So this is kind of a play. If anybody's interested this summer, we're going to put that on when Steve comes back in July.
Could I build on that? By the way, the woman's name that I know anyway, who's on that road, is Elaine Schleisacker. And she has a remarkable garden. And but I wanted to make a very practical announcement building on Annette's thing about activism, is that UU Mass Action is our statewide activist network. And they're getting ready to hold their lobby day, which will be, let's see, it's about April 12th. I've got everything down here except the date. And, but it's about the 12th. But the deadline to sign up for the lobby day is April 6th. So that's coming right up, and that's Tuesday. And they're going to do a virtual trip to the State House on lobby day. And they're holding 2 training days. One is April 7th, 7:30 at night. And one is April 8th in the middle of the day at 1 o'clock. And I will put it in the chat, but the person to be signing up with is Laura Wagner, who's the executive director. So L. Wagner at uumassactionallsmallletters.org. That's one. And there's a couple more. Saturday, May 1st, there's a nationwide dialogue going on UU class conversations, crossing class lines. I'll put that in the chat. And there's also a nationwide call for participating in democracy voting. This is like one of our main principles. And that
okay, we should get those notes out in our newsletters. So let's do that.
I'll put
thanks so much. The third Sunday of the month is going to be Julie Payne Britton on Earth Day. I don't think is Julie with us this morning?
I don't think so.
Her. Okay, so know that it's going to be Julie on Earth Day. Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
I would like to make an announcement.
Okay.
I have recently signed up to do phone calls for represent us to the two reluctant Democratic senators to vote for the People's Act. And I feel as though that's probably the most important thing to get passed right now than anything else. And so the calls are going to go to Senator Seema in Arizona, and they recommend starting with Arizona because it's an easier list to deal with. And the other one is to West Virginia, to Joe Mancina. And those are the two who are questioning whether or not they should be in favor of it. And I feel as though I hate making phone calls, but that's what I'm going to be doing.
Sounds like it.
And okay.
Dan?
Kate.
Here.
Kate.
Hi. Just a quick mention that this Thursday, Interfaith Council, Center School, and maybe Social Justice Rising is having a Zoom presentation, Building a Culture of Reparations. And Dr. David Ragland will be presenting, and that's going to be at 7 p.m. on Thursday the 8th. I can put more information in the chat.
And I'd like to add one quickie for anybody who's feeling a real hankering to go to a library. Athol and Orangetown libraries are open now. I was there on Thursday, and it felt really good. So, letting people know.
Next week, First Parish will have their 10:30 service with Allison Cornish, who is with us this morning. Thank you. Do you want to share your topic for next week at First Parish?
Sure, thanks. We'll be doing the third of that three-part series on the Declaration of Fellowship. This one focusing on service.
Thank you. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, the three Unitarian-Universalist churches of Franklin County get together 2 or 3 Sundays a month, and then we have our independent churches who do different things on different Sundays. So they're all interesting things, and sometimes you have to choose. Anyway, I think we'll end the announcements, being 11 o'clock here. If you have anything else, please put it in the chat. Okay, and Jim, get yourself ready. I'm about to cue you up. Our next hymn is it's number 266 in Singing the Living Tradition. And it's one of only 5 Easter hymns in the hymn book. And I actually see it more as a Good Friday hymn of sorts. And I love the music, but also the message that it has. Here in New England, as winter ends, everything seems lifeless. When the snow melts, that bright coating reveals this brown field. And even though the days in spring are longer, because the snow is no longer reflecting the light, the world seems darker and even colder. So it's sort of the seasonal equivalent to Good Friday. So it's called Now the Green Blade Riseth, and Jim's going to sing that for us.
Now the green blade riseth from the buried grain, wheat that in the dark earth many days has lain. Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Love is come again like wheat that springeth green. In the grave they laid love, love by hatred slain, thinking that never love would wake again. Laid in the earth like grain that sleeps unseen, love is come again like wheat that springeth green. When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, love's touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, love is come again like the wheat that springeth green.
Hearts were wintry, grieving and in pain, because the fascist armies had won. They controlled Italy, France, Greece, Spain, Turkey. They had footholds all across the coast of North Africa, and they were poised to invade and occupy England. The fascists were led by a brutal dictator who had turned democratic institutions into rubber stamps for his will, violently quashing any internal dissent and publicly torturing to death the leaders of any underground movements as an example to others. Using millions of slave laborers, they expanded their transportation network so their armies could quickly move in a blitzkrieg in any direction their generals wanted. You might ask at this point, why am I talking about World War II on Easter? Good question. But the situation I just described isn't from 1941. It's from the first 3 centuries Anno Domini. If you peel away the propaganda about the glories of Rome, the Roman Empire is comparable to what would have happened if the Nazis had won World War II, if Hitler and his minions had ruled Europe for centuries. The symbol of Roman imperial power was this, the bundle of sticks. Let's see here. This is a bundle of sticks with an axe head in it. It's called a fasces. Mussolini adopted this as his symbol in the 1920s, and that's where we got the word fascism. The connection between him and the Roman emperors is no coincidence. The Easter story is set in the context of Roman-occupied Israel. The government is a brutal, oppressive force, foreigners who disdain the local culture, and collaborators like King Herod and the Sanhedrin are trying to preserve a little bit of power and independence, not unlike the Vichy government of France in 1940. By the end of the 1st century, the Romans had conquered the world from Hadrian's Wall in the north of England to the Nile Basin in the south, In the east, they had conquered Spain, and in the west, they had Albania, Syria, and Mesopotamia. And about a third of the people in Italy were enslaved. Under this map, hopelessness, brutality, inequality, and state-sanctioned torture were the norm. This is the environment in which the Christian stories were written and ideas about who Jesus was evolved for several hundred years. Now, seen in this light, the four gospel accounts of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, whether you believe they're literally true or not, demonstrate important facts about human psychology and how people use stories to survive and overcome oppression and injustice. This morning, 99% of the other churches in the world are reciting the creed that Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. Now, while we don't say that, what shall we make of the fact that so many others do? After all, humanists are interested in what humans do and why. It doesn't mean that we should believe in biblical or believe anything on the basis of inadequate evidence. It does mean that we ought to appreciate the value of a story that took centuries to develop and has kept its power over millennia. The Easter and Passover holidays maintained hope when the situation seemed hopeless. They kept an ember of freedom glowing under tyranny. And both holidays imagine a future where justice is finally done, where people are freed from oppression. Last week, Jews observed the first night of Passover with the Seder, the ritual feast that retells the story from the book of Exodus of how Moses led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And the situation that Exodus describes is just as hopeless as it would seem under the Romans 12 centuries or so later. The Pharaoh is just as despotic as Caesar, maybe more so. In this story, the Israelites are freed not by their military rebellion, but by the help of divine intervention. The 10 plagues to convince Pharaoh to set them free, the parting of the Red Sea to let them escape. What are we today to make of these miracle stories? Don't get the impression that the modern times are the first to question the Passover story, because the challenge to Jewish faith was much greater in the first century of the Common Era. Think of this. If Yahweh had done so much for them in Egypt and kept the Hanukkah lamp lit for 8 nights after the Maccabees drove the Greeks from the temple in Jerusalem, how come in the year 70 he let the Romans utterly obliterate Solomon's temple and disperse the Jews from the Holy Land without so much as one frog falling from the sky, one son of Caesar dying, or the river Tiber turning to blood? How come manna didn't fall from the sky to feed the Jewish rebels at Masada? These historical events and their conflict with the story of the Exodus led to deep questioning in the first and second centuries. And it wasn't the first time Judaism had confronted these questions. The book of Isaiah deals with the first exile to Babylon and some 500 years before. In any case, during the first century of the Common Era, AD, Anno Domini, AD, a small Jewish cult, the followers of Rabbi Jesus, began to wrestle with these issues, and they invented a theology that explained why ritual animal sacrifices in the Temple of Solomon, or the Second Temple, weren't needed anymore, and promising that someday soon the Romans would be overthrown and the kingdom of God on earth would be established. The Last Supper is set on Passover for a very good reason. All the apostles were Jewish. We can assume that they'd all celebrated Seders every year for their life. And they knew that the oppression under the Romans echoed the slavery under Egypt. And they were hoping for the same kind of miracles that saved their ancestors. That was one of their motivations for following Jesus. So, what might we make of these stories and their links with each other? What's the truth of the matter? The easy, cynical thing would be to dismiss the Passover and Easter stories for lack of evidence. You know, if every firstborn Egyptian child had been slain, if plagues of locusts had come and frogs had fallen from the sky and rivers turned to blood, if hundreds of thousands of Jews had walked across the Red Sea parted by Charlton Heston, you know, you'd think that some Egyptian hieroglyphic might mention that story, but they don't. Archaeologists have combed the Sinai Desert looking for pottery shards from the time of the Sinai wandering, looking for shards with Hebrew writing on them, and they haven't found any. And you'd kind of assume that after 40 years of wandering in the desert, somebody might have accidentally dropped something. Likewise, the Romans were very good record keepers, but there's no reliable non-Christian report, or few, of Jesus being crucified. And the Mediterranean cultures of the time were awash with stories of dying and resurrecting gods, notably the Egyptian Osiris with the goddess Osiris in the role of Mother Mary. So perhaps, you're free to believe what you want to believe, maybe these things never really happened, at least not in the way they were written down years later. My point this morning is, in a deeper sense, that doesn't really matter. What matters in a humanist sense is that human beings chose to make these particular stories sacred and celebrate them every year. To quote a professor of religion at Duke University, Carol Myers, in the really wonderful Frontline series, From Jesus to Christ, she said, "The theme of a real people achieving freedom from oppression is something that resonates strongly with the biblical authors. The theme of the Exodus is an archetype not only in the Bible, but in Western culture in general. Even though it may be rooted in some cultural memory experienced by only a few people, not 600,000, it became a way of looking at the world that would have great power for generations and millennia to come. The idea that human beings should be free to determine the course of their own lives, to be able to work and enjoy the rewards of the work of their own hands and their own minds. These are very powerful ideas that resonate in the human spirit. And Exodus gives narrative reality to those ideas. Narrative reality. It would be compelling for peoples all over the world, wherever people find themselves subjected to domination and would like to live their lives in some other kind of way. Perhaps you remember Bill Moyer's series, Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, on PBS. Before then, if we called something a myth, we were saying it was false. Afterwards, it meant a story that was deeply woven into culture. And Campbell taught us that ancient tales weren't meant to be historical records anyway. And many liberal rabbis and clergy are much more open to non-literal interpretations of Scripture than their congregations are. One rabbi said, "Our faith doesn't rest on splitting seas." Well, if not, what does your faith rest on? Where does this come from? Let's go back to the rise of the Roman Empire and its conversion from a republic to a dictatorship. Our impressions of ancient Rome are heavily influenced by centuries of spin. The architecture and art of ancient Rome, the road network, the huge aqueduct system, the invention of concrete and the advances in metallurgy, the glory of Rome is what we celebrate today. The CinemaScope movies of our time put a gloss on that reality. The Romans are bad guys in a way, but the last 2,000 years have mythologized the violence that made that empire possible. Even the story of Pontius Pilate washing his hands of the responsibility for the crucifixion is an example of the gospel writer trying to absolve Rome of evil. We need to remember that these aqueducts were built by enslaved, conquered people, that the Colosseum was the scene of centuries of murder by gladiators and people being fed to the lions for the entertainment of cheering Romans. This was a fertile environment for a new religion that says the meek will inherit the earth, and even if you get crucified by the imperialists, you'll have the last laugh. A century before Jesus, the escaped gladiator Spartacus led a slave revolt of about 100,000 against the Roman armies, and they did very well for a while. But when they were finally defeated, the Roman general crucified 6,000 of them and hung their bodies from crosses every 100 feet along the road as an example of the others. That's lynching on a grand scale to keep the slaves in place. Yet, the month of July is named for Julius Caesar, and the month of August memorializes Caesar Augustus. The Catholic Church stopped saying Mass in Latin only a few decades ago. When you read about the emperors in history, they're more like mafia godfathers than constitutional leaders. Their intrigues are as brutal as anything depicted in the HBO series Game of Thrones. And this is the environment that led the Jewish upper class, the scribes and temple priests, to become a client state of the Romans. The alternative was to be wiped out. It's very hard for us in the modern era to understand the Judaism of the first century, but maybe some analogies would help. The Judaism that we know of the post-destruction era is based on rabbis and synagogues diffused around the world. But in the Second Temple period, you might think of Jerusalem as being the Jewish Vatican, with the high priest as the Pope holding vast power and wealth. Caiaphas. It's very different from the Judaism that we're familiar with. And like any top-down power structure, it is prone to self-aggrandizement. Many average Jews hated the compromise their leaders had made with the Romans, and so they headed out to caves in the desert. They were a religion in exile. They were known as the Essenes. We know more about them because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was another more militant group out there called the Zealots. In the century following the death of Jesus, things got worse for Israel and all the people in it. Emperor Caligula ordered that his statue be placed in the temple of Jerusalem and worshipped. In the year 66, full-scale war broke out between the Jews and the Romans, ending in the total destruction of the temple that I showed you. That eliminated the center of Jewish life and the power of the priests. During these decades, several people besides Jesus were hailed as the Messiah, notably Simon Bar Kokhba, who led the final Jewish rebellion against the Romans. And it's during this time when Christianity became a distinct religion from Judaism, because they believed that Jesus was the Messiah and that he brought a message of peace, not war. Both groups struggled to understand why God let the evil Romans defeat the chosen people. And for Christians, the question was, why hadn't Jesus come back? Why hadn't the world ended? It's pretty clear in several New Testament passages that most of the apostles believed that Jesus would return in their lifetime. And as the apostles passed away and the apocalypse hadn't happened, there was a certain moving of the goalposts that took place. One attempt to explain this is the final book of the Christian Bible, the book of Revelation. It was written late in this period. Now, responsible scholars tell us that Revelation is a kind of coded message about how the Romans would eventually be defeated by the return of Jesus. You know, the four horsemen, all that. For example, the mark of the beast, 666, is easily decoded as a reference to the Emperor Nero. In the end, both Christianity and Judaism muddled through, and they changed, they evolved. Christianity got co-opted by the empire, but they did outlive the Roman Empire. And our religious holidays are a mix of Judeo-Christian, Roman, and Northern European influences. We have Christmas trees, Easter bunnies and eggs, lilies, lambs and lamb shanks, horseradish, cups of wine at Seder and Communion. No story is pure and unchanging, uninfluenced by the people it's told to. What is said isn't exactly what's meant. And what's heard isn't necessarily understood, especially when a story is carried across thousands of years. But we can still relate to these stories, but despite all that, because when it comes to grief of death and rage at injustice. After all, the heart of the Easter story is the story of an innocent person, a good person, put to death for little reason by an oppressive society of corrupt power that was afraid of even the slightest challenge. The Passover story is the story of a people working to free themselves from a stubborn ruler, completely lacking in empathy, not only for the Jews, but for his own people. We don't need to believe in supernatural assistance to Moses or the resurrection of Jesus to appreciate the value of these stories to people then and now who face systemic injustice, who mourn senseless death and disease, or from disease or gunfire, or a knee on the neck. In times and places where most people felt crucified most of the time, when and where life is nasty and brutish and short, we shouldn't be so sure that our reason and science would be able to cope as we think it would. Compared with the time memorialized in these holidays, we live in a really great time. This past year of COVID-19 brought us a little taste of the world of the past. Imagine what it would be like if we had no idea what viruses are, how they travel on droplets in the air from lung to lung. What it would be like in a world where illness comes out of the dark and we have no vaccine, no medicine to treat it. Imagine if the Third Reich had won the war, and the Gestapo today would be monitoring our Facebook accounts and hauling our ministers to the gas chambers. If we heard a story that said in the end or in the next life, justice would be done, wouldn't we hang on to that story for dear life? Even if it weren't literally true, wouldn't it make it more likely that we'd fight, that we'd have the courage to keep going until the Nazi government was overthrown or transformed? That's a humanist, or what I'd call post-atheist, view of Pesach and Eastertide. Not to condescend for their supernaturalism, but appreciation for the human ability to find hope in the darkest times. I'm well aware that these stories may lead some to a faith that's going to disappoint them. And I've lived with people who relied on magical religious thinking to the point where they screwed up their lives. Wishing and praying alone don't make the world better. The Jews weren't freed from the Nazi concentration camps in 1945 by bolts of lightning from the sky, but by the Russian army from the east and the American British armies from the west. It's the responsibility of human beings to act against injustice, oppression, and evil. We can't sit back and pray for God to do that for us. But if those stories of Easter and Passover inspire people to rise up against seemingly insurmountable forces, we shouldn't discount them. These holidays remind us every year that dark forces may take control of our world. People who fight against them may be unjustly slain or imprisoned. But we can still have faith that the arc of the universe bends towards justice as long as we're willing to bend it that way. Well, Jim, you have a final song for us this morning to send us off?
Did I unmute?
Yep.
I might need these. Go your way in peace. Wander as you may. Blessed is the path you take. May love guide you on your way. Comfort find in truth. May your struggles cease. May the fire within your heart light the way of peace. Bright and brave the dreams, born in darkest night. Mindful make our every step, honor all within our sight. Minds and hearts now one, till we meet again. Hold the vision of our peace, sacred until then.
Another one from Jim's extensive vault of wonderful music. Our closing words today were written by a Unitarian, Jane Rzepka. It's in our hymnal as number 510. We have, O Spirit of life and renewal, we have wintered enough, mourned enough, oppressed ourselves enough. Our souls are too long cold and buried, our dreams all but forgotten, our hopes unheard. We are waiting to rise from the dead. In this, the season of steady rebirth, we awaken to the power so abundant, so holy, that returns each year through earth and sky. We will find our hearts again and our good spirits. We will love and believe and give and wonder and feel again the eternal powers. The flow of life moves ever onward through one faithful spring and another and now another. May we be forever grateful. Alleluia and Amen. Thank you for your kind attention this morning. Thank you, Jim. Oh, I didn't realize you were probably providing background music to that. I thought it was. Anyway, we open up the floor now to a parish hall, and I can, if you wish, set up some breakout rooms for the different communities here, if you wish. In fact, I'll just do that in case. I'll hang out in the parish hall for a while, and I'll drop in on each one of the groups. Let's go to, and I don't know if anybody's watching us on YouTube right now. I don't see the number for some reason, but thank you for joining us, and feel free to this will appear as a recording on YouTube if you'd like to send it to a friend or something like that. So